talk about this concept of American exceptionalism as it relates to foreign policy. So American exceptionalism is an idea that can be defined in many different ways, but one of the ways you can look at it is that America is uniquely suited to spread democratic values. And there are a couple of reasons that Americans feel this way, and that it's a kind of hegemonic idea that has kind of stuck through US history. And it really starts in the founding period, where the US does something very exceptional in 1776, which is overthrow the British. And if you know anything about British history, the British are a dominant world power with many colonies from, really 1650 until 1945. And so for a group of colonists who don't have really anything, the ability to overthrow the British Empire is an enormous feat. And they do have help from the French when doing this. But it still is remarkable, and it certainly gives the colonists a real sense of ego after the Revolutionary War. And that independence movement inspires many other independence movements across the Americas, which leads to a lot of independence for many places in the Americas. So you look at South America, Central America, you're going to see Europeans, in this case Spain and Portugal, are kicked out. And we see independence movements by many, many places. And Haiti also has their independence movement against France. But what the US does that is unique after that other countries aren't able to do, is they form representative governments very quickly. I say quickly because by 1790, you have a new constitution that has a representative government. And it is exceptional for any region. If you look at the history of the world, it's very unique for a region after a war to actually be able to start democracy. And by democracy, I'm referring to a representative government here where people can vote. And again, it's limited who can vote. It gets expanded over time. But a representative government is something you don't see happen after a lot of revolutions. It does not happen in Haiti. It does not develop in Mexico. It does not develop in France for hundreds of years. It does not develop in England for many years. The US is unique, and those two things combined really give the Americans this inflated sense of ego, which you could argue is rightfully justified in some of these things they do, but then they start to act as if they are better than other places, and that they are more uniquely suited to spread democratic values. And this starts in 1823 with something called the Monroe Doctrine. You could argue it starts with lots of things. I'm not going to talk about indigenous peoples and indigenous nations that they fight against, but this document, 1823, the Monroe Doctrine, basically says that Europe needs to stay out of the Americas. And it's a document only created by the United States. And the rest of the countries in the Americas are like, why would you send this document to Europe telling them to stay out? You have no business telling us what to do. And the US says, well, no, we do. And this document has no military backing to it. It really is just a doctrine. And then in the 1840s, the US fights a war against Mexico to claim a lot of territory in what will become the Western United States. In 1898, they fight the Spanish. And we start to see the US develop this idea that they deserve things. They are entitled to land, to resources, that they should be a world power. And this feeling develops in the 1800s, but they don't have a strong enough military to back that up. That strong military doesn't come until World War II. So in the 1800s, they're able to, defeat the Mexican military. And they're partially doing this because Mexico was recovering after their rebellion against the Spanish. And they're not the strongest they're ever going to be when the U.S. takes land from them. And in the Spanish-American War, the U.S. is fighting the Spanish Empire, which by the year 1898 is no longer the Spain of 1500, and therefore is defeated in what they patronizingly refer to as a splendid little war. But what we see in the 1800s is this idea that, see, the U.S. can defeat powers. And then in World War I, the reason that the Allies win is because of the influx of U.S. troops. It's not the only reason. The Allies had to sit in the trenches for years in this stalemate, but the U.S. breaks the stalemate. And Woodrow Wilson, who enters the Paris Peace Conference, he knows this when he enters. He says, we're the reason that you won. We should have a say in what happens. And the Europeans essentially know you can't have a say. The only thing Woodrow Wilson is able to get into the Paris Peace Conference, into the Treaty of Versailles, is the League of Nations, which then his own country doesn't want to join. But what we start to see in the 1900s is that the U.S. feels that it is entitled to be a leader. It is entitled to resources around the world, and that it is uniquely suited to be that global power. And we see that completely play out during the Cold War, which is from 1945 to 1992 until the Soviet Union collapses, where the US is more anti-communist than it is pro-democracy. And it plays out into the 90s as we see the rise of both domestic and international terrorism. And we see the movement against various Islamic countries around the world. And it's coming from a place that's long-standing tradition in U.S. history, where the U.S. believes it's uniquely suited to use weapons, that it has moral superiority to use those weapons, and that it is exceptional in its ability to lead the world for democracy. When we look at the actual history of that, there is not as much evidence, aside from that first founding period, which you could argue excluded many people, to prove that the U.S. is exceptional in spreading democratic values.